a very difficult election season this past year and a half almost. And then, of course, the election of President-elect Donald Trump. And I want to integrate into my remarks the ideas that religious traditions bring to bear in dealing with momentous occasions. And I think for most of the Americans who I've encountered, the election of Donald Trump is quite a momentous thing, right? It is more momentous than the election of other past presidents, for some reason, and we can sort of think about that, right? And perhaps even challenge this idea that this is such a momentous, such a incredibly important thing. Perhaps it is, and perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's not that momentous as we might want to make it, or that we perceive it, or that it may actually be. So I would like us to think about our religious tradition, the Muslim religious tradition, and I'll share with you some verses that sort of help to think about and frame the concerns, the fears, and there are many, many things to be concerned about from the rhetoric that we heard during the election season. There are many things to be concerned about in the less than a week and a half that has transpired in terms of the appointees that we are seeing either proposed or coming and then going. We can be very concerned about a number of things. And then we need to look at our tradition. Then we need to look at the core of what God, your Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has told us about the affairs of human beings. So I would like us to sort of think and focus in that way. The first idea is part of the core, it's at the heart of the Muslim tradition, that everything happens by the decree of God. Everything happens by the decree of God. So God says, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مِّن قَبْلِ أَن نَّبْرَأَهَا إِنَّ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ يَسِيرٌ لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم ولا تفرحوا بما آتاكم والله لا يحب كل مختال فخور. No misfortune can happen, either in the earth or in yourselves, that was not set down in writing before we brought it into being. That is easy for God. It's part of our core concept of the decree of God. So you need not grieve for what you miss or gloat for what you gain. Every individual who elected Trump, who's gloating, this verse says, don't gloat. Every American who voted for Hillary and is grieving that Hillary didn't come, don't grieve. That's the essence of these two short verses. Right? That the decree is God's decree. And that Muslims are utterly comfortable saying that God decreed the rise of Trump. Okay? And those of you who are philosophers and are very interested in the issues of destiny and predestination and so on, or who are theologians, we can look at that in detail. That is not this is not the forum for it. But nevertheless, in a nutshell, it is very clear in the Muslim tradition and theology that God's decree reigns supreme, and this is part of God's decree. This is not a judgment, this is not a curse, but it is a test. It is a test, and everything that is part of God's decree is a test. The question is, how do you approach it? So this is important for us to recognize, that this is not the end of the world, that this is a decree from God, and that anyone who is in pain because he won or Hillary didn't, or gloating because he won and Hillary didn't, neither of these attitudes are the right attitude. You don't need to gloat that he won, and you don't need to weep that he won. That's very important. This doesn't take away the fact that as a minority group, religious minority, in many ways you are multiple minorities. You're a religious minority, you're an ethnic minority. You know, for an African American Muslim woman who wears the hijab, she's got how many knocks against her? She's an African American. She's a woman. She's a Muslim. She's a hijabi Muslim. That's 4. I could go on. And this is real, okay? If anybody, if any imam or if any scholar in the Muslim community say, oh, you know, sisters, hijabi sisters, all the hijab, just relax, Allah will take care of you. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. We as the Muslim community need to stand up and say, no, you are not going to go and bother my Muslim sister. You're not going to go and bother a woman because she's a woman. These are parts of the, remember this is Allah's decree, right? So this is now part of our test. Are we going to stand up and say no, no to this behavior, because that is part of what Allah has decreed, and given us the opportunity to rise up to this occasion and say, no, this will not happen, not in our name, not when we are citizens, not when we are capable of saying no to this. And this is not about going out and committing evil acts. No, no, no. This is about being outspoken under the rule of law, which is the United States. Right? And because of the rule of law, we accept President-elect Donald Trump. We accept that. That's the rule of law. And we also accept that if he chooses to do what he, half of the things, a third of the things, a tenth of the things that he has spread the rhetoric around, then we would say, I would say, in the same words that Bernie Sanders said, to the degree that Donald Trump is serious about pursuing policies that improve the lives of working families in this country, I and other progressives, he said, I will change it to people, are prepared to work with him. And to the degree that he pursues racist, sexist, xenophobic, and anti-environment policies, we will vigorously oppose him. Right? And this is, to me, and I suggest you think about this, you don't have to accept this statement that I'm about to make. I think this is a balanced way of dealing with, on the practical level, dealing with whatever is to come, which is all part of the decree of God. So this is important. Remember that this is part of the decree of God, and that you are now called upon to do the things that you want, that you need to do. And you can no longer, and we've said this many times, you can no longer be comfortable in your enclaves of success, because for every one of you who's successful and untouched by racism and sexism and xenophobia, there's a whole bunch of other people who are experiencing that. Okay, and it behooves you to stand up for what is right, even if it's not happening to you. Because if it's not happening to you today, it might happen under the decree of God to you tomorrow. And then what will you do? So we need, as the Muslim American community, to have strong ties of partnerships with the larger community and stand up for what is right. So that's the first thing I want to remind you. And to conclude this first very important idea, remember Ibrahim alayhi salam, Prophet Abraham. When the king decided to throw him into the fire. And you know, as modern people, we can't conceive of the idea of somebody being thrown into the fire, right? But that's the Quranic narrative, right? That Ibrahim is thrown into the fire. And as he's being thrown in, Ibrahim's response is, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient, God is sufficient for us, and He's the best caretaker of affairs. And that is the most beautiful attitude for us to have. If you are afraid of Donald Trump, or if you're afraid of the things to come, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah, God is sufficient for us, and He's the best caretaker of affairs. And you will sense a calmness, an equanimity that will allow you to deal with things in a constructive manner. Otherwise, you will break down. And there are Muslim Americans who are breaking down, who are saying, I don't know what to do with this. But you do know what to do with this. You have the wherewithal in your religious tradition to bring it out and deal with this. That capacity is there. And that capacity, by the way, is not just in the Muslim tradition. It's there in all the other traditions. Because all of these we have to remember, go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Creator. All of these are revealed traditions. So that's very important. And when Allah tells us, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونُوا بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا, عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ, O fire, be coolness and safety upon Abraham. This is our utter faith that this is precisely what happened, even though Our minds are unable to explain this. Our minds are incapable of explaining how fire lost its capacity to burn Ibrahim. But that's what God says. And you may struggle as a scientist, you may struggle as even a believer to figure that out. But this is the promise of God. To those who are capable of receiving that promise of God, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, Allah is sufficient for us. And when you do that, you get the results that Ibrahim received at the hands of God. And if you create that capacity, you will be able to deal with whatever it is that Allah has decreed for us to deal with. So this is your prophet and my prophet, Abraham. That was the first idea. The second idea, victories and defeats, the rise and fall of groups and parties. The tide, the ebb and flow of tide. These go in cycles. So the Prophet and his small band of 313 people won against a far superior force of 1,000 of the Meccan raiders, right? In Badr, in the month of fasting, in the month of Ramadan. And then, a couple of years later, when the balance of power was almost equal, the Muslims lost. Why? You can go read that surah that explains the events of Uhud. Right? Because Allah tells us, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. We deal out such days among people in turns, for God to find out who truly believes. For whom to find out who truly believes? Allah says for him to find out. In actuality, it's for us to find out about ourselves. And for God to reveal to us who amongst us, when we are faced with difficulties, stays steadfast and reveals to ourselves that capacity that He has given us, that we have now been able to use it. And for those of us who succumb to this pressure and this pain and just give up, then also it is revealed to us that we didn't do what we needed to do to take care of this problem. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, will take communities, and this is true of all communities. It's not exclusive to any one group of religious traditions or ethnic groups or ethnic or geographical area. It applies to all of our history. Arnold Toynbee talks about the rise and fall of nations, and Ibn Khaldun talked about the rise and fall of nations. And this is everyone that goes through it. Okay? So recognize this as part of the longer capacity and deeper capacity to deal with what we have to deal with. Third idea, there can be good in evil things. There can be good in evil things. Or what we perceive as evil can, with patience and perseverance, turn out to be really good. Look, before I share the verse with you, let me tell you something that I know about Americans. Many voted for Trump. It is not equivalent to say that all those who voted for Trump hate all of you and that they're all racist. It's not the case. Many voted for Trump because they're sick and tired of the broken political system that we have in the United States. It's broken. It's not working. It's not working. Or maybe it's working for the 1%, or it's maybe working for portions of the society, but it's not working for everybody. So maybe you can see in this a vote of frustration that those people who are not racist but still voted for Trump, they voted because they thought to continue with the status quo is worse than trying somebody who seems like he's talking a good game, and maybe he will deliver. Perhaps some of you who didn't vote for Trump might say, that's foolishness. Perhaps it is foolishness. But we need to recognize the motivation that is present there. And that is what we have to connect to. Okay? If you're going to stay a distance from that group of people who did vote for Trump and say, well, you're by default you're racist, and that is a narrative out there right now. But it's a narrative that I think as people of religion, people of values, one has to be careful about. cannot broad brush every person who voted for Trump as racist and xenophobic. And there will be many who are, and there are many who are not. And that subtleness of recognition is important if we are going to do something and change something in this matter. So understand that there can be good and evil things. Understand that in this process there might be changes that come that is better for all of society. And God's plan is unknown to us, to you and to me. But we need to be open to God's plan, that if opportunities come up, how do you leverage? You leverage by knowing people. You leverage by having connections, that human connection. At the end of the day, the person who voted for Trump, that person's essential identity is not that he voted for Trump, but that he's a human being just like you. That is the essential identity of every human being. And we cannot forget that because that person voted for Trump. You know, there are Muslim Americans who voted for Trump. Would you be surprised in hearing that? Maybe one of you who is a Muslim actually voted for Trump, and it's fine. It's not a problem. Because it is all part of the decree of God, and that we need to deal with it. So Allah says, فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And it is possible that you dislike a matter, but God places much good in it. And I can already see the rise of Trump, the rise of the alt-right, okay, is an opportunity for a unity to eschew racism, xenophobia, once and for all in the United States. That is an opportunity. Will we rise up to it or not? I don't know. But it is an opportunity. Right? When racism, which has never really left America, which is to say that racism will never leave any human society, right? Because that's a human condition, not an American condition. It's a human condition. So racism will never, ever completely be eradicated. But if racism was not out in the surface, today it is, right? Today, Trump's rhetoric has spilled it out for all of us. And we're seeing the effects of it, right? You're seeing the FaceTube, YouTube clips of Muslim women's scarves being pulled. What happened yesterday with a firebomb thrown into a car on a California highway. These are things that are happening, and they are scary. But حَسْبُنَا اللَّهَ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. Allah is sufficient for us, and is the caretaker of our affairs. Let us not forget. And the final idea that I want to leave you with in dealing with this, do not lose hope. As Muslims, we are almost conditioned in the way we approach our religious tradition, our rituals, to not lose hope. But it is possible that you pray 5 times a day, that you remember God, that you send blessings on the Prophet, and you still feel fear. It's okay to feel the fear, but it's not okay to let that fear go unchecked. وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. And do not become weak, nor grieve, for surely you shall be victorious if you believe. And so what God is telling us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us here, is that you will feel weak and you will feel grief, but do not give in to that. Do not give in to that. For surely you shall be victorious if you believe. If you believe in the decree of God, and if you believe that God can engineer good out of apparent evil, then you will be fine. And we will all be fine. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ولكم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. It is very important that we as a community, as believers, as upright, decent, good people, that you reach out. Reach out to those who don't know you. Those who do not know how good and upright you are. And the only way that will happen is that if you make your homes, and your mosque is your home, and your homes are your homes, open and receiving those who don't know you, that includes everybody who's your neighbor, and extend your circles. This is critical. If you're going to have the capacity to deal with this, it is critical that you connect with people who are different than you are. They don't pray 5 times a day. They pray on Saturdays. They pray on Sundays. They don't pray. It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you connected to human beings who are just like you? And that who begin to dialogue with you and understand who you are. And in the process find that we have far more in common than we do otherwise. This is critically important. This is the opportunity for you to engage and connect. So I invite you to really challenge yourselves. Open your hearts and minds. Remove your fears. Remove your prejudices. Remove your prejudices. Think about the prejudice you, as American Muslims, hold against those who are Americans. Do you hold prejudices? If you do, you need to let them go. And if you tell me none of you have prejudice, then you're not being honest with yourselves, because you do have prejudice. That's a human condition, and you are not immune from it. Maybe you are going to be very successful in dealing with it, but you're not immune from it. And not being immune is the test from God. Because God has created us, as I said last month, halu'a. We are created anxious, fretful, and nervous. Right? And those anxious anxieties and fretfulness and nervousness turns us into people who express prejudice. So when we stay away from that type of behavior, then the prejudice truly is managed. So I invite you to really deeply think about this idea of opening your hearts and minds to people, engaging them, inviting them into your homes. And you can do this. You all live in neighborhoods. Reach out to your neighbors, invite them, and tell them, I want you to know who I am. That's why I'm inviting you. I want you to know who I am. I'm a Muslim. I'm an American. I have values that are exactly your values. And I worship a God that you actually worship. Right? A lot of Americans think Allah is something. Allah is not God. Allah is, some Arabian deity. Maybe that's their idea, Then you can tell them a nice little ditty. You can tell them, the Arabs who are Christians, those who speak Arabic, what do they call God? They call him Allah, right? Why? Because that's the name of God in Arabic. And I've found many times just that little piece of information is an aha moment for people, because they've never heard that. And when they hear that, their hearts and their minds open up. Okay? And when you bring out biryani, done. That's it. Right? Or mansaf, or baklava, or hummus, or whatever it is, that your kindness is the door to people's hearts. The Prophet, when he arrived in Medina, he said, feed people and spread peace by saying salam. It's time for us to do that. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون واقم الصلاة